7 years.
You lied!
I crave the real. I crave you. I miss you. Hello. Hello.
You Hey, how are you? Welcome in. Thank you for all the likes. My goodness. How are you? How is everyone feeling? How was your day? Get that out the way. There we go. We're gonna try out this YouTube thing again. We're gonna switch it up. I'm gonna change it up here. Um, hey Siobhan, I made you a moderator. I'll help you out with you said Canva after we get off Discord. You love that opening? Thank you so much. The intro is awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. We're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about China and their impact on Black revolutionary thought in the United States in particular. Hold on, let me turn on my lamp. It's dark in here. I didn't realize how dark it was. That's better. That's better, right? I'm sorry it was so dark. Oh my gosh. So, um, so what we have here, we have key points. So the big thing that I wanted to talk about, and I'll wait for a couple people to get in here. You use your powers responsibly. Nice, awesome. Hey, Adamant, how are you? Or just Adam, whatever. Um, but yeah, today I wanted to talk about China because I love China. I fucking love China. I wanted to, especially since the downfall and the resurgence apparently of perfect. I look great. Awesome. Thank you. I look great. Thank you so much. But I wanted to talk about China because of the downfall of TikTok the other day, and it's the resurgence of TikTok. W China 100%. The resurgence of TikTok and the reason why the US claims, I cannot figure this seat out right now. There we go. That's better. There we go. Woosinophilia. I think it's spelled with an X though. I think it's spelled with an X, isn't it? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's Sino. I thought it was XINO. Either way, that's what I wanted to talk about. And we have here, these are just some key points. As you can see, this is Columbia University. Um, talking about key points. I'm going to be talking about mostly about the Chinese Revolution and the conceptualization of Maoism as it pertains to the Black Panthers, especially. And I have in the link in the down there part down there, I have the link to a Discord that I'm also in right now. I'm trying this thing out with this Discord server. Uh, I don't even know where to put it, but I'm trying this thing out with this Discord server to see if it helps with like the debating stuff. But yeah, what we'll be going over, this is kind of just like a brief thing, brief little history, little briefing of what we'll go over on in the history, because we're going to talk about like what led essentially to the Chinese Civil War that allowed for Mao to take over. The conceptualization of Maoism and his thought process, his strategy, and how it was utilized by Black people in the US. I've never done anything like this before. I said I would be doing news content, which I consider this to be fairly news content, especially since it has something to do with what we've been going through these past couple days with the downfall of TikTok and with the like resurgence of TikTok and the surgence, I guess. I mean, maybe not a resurgence of oh, who is that? I can't even read it. Where's my activity feed? Give me 1 second here. Give me 1 second here. Hey, Katie, how are you? How are you? It says I have my activity feed. Wait, hold on. Oh, that's not the right activity feed. Oh, wait, yes, it is. That is the right activity feed. It's just in the wrong spot. There we go. There we go. Thank you, Katie, for the subscription. I appreciate it. Thank you, Volcity, also for the subscription, and Melissa for the subscription. We appreciate you. Thank you for being here. You're awesome. Hey, Boo. Hey, Boo. How are you? I hope you're doing well. I'll make this a little bit wider. There we go. I'm messing with my settings so I can read stuff better. Ignore me talking to myself. I had to set it up so I could see it. All right. But we'll be going over this. Essentially, what I'm going to start by talking about is the conditions in China, pre-revolution, especially, um, and why like socialism was so good in China. Uh, how was I not subscribed? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I'm not. That's Solid. Everybody, say hi to Solid. W Solid for being here. That's going to be another one of our mods. W Solid for the people. That's what Solid is. Solid is for the people. Ooh. Oh, okay. There we go. So we're going to be first going over, I'm going to be telling you a brief history about China. China was split up into different sections. Like China in itself before the revolution was essentially like six different countries. I mean, it was like around two different countries more so, but it was essentially six different countries. And all of those countries were led by what people would call warlords. I just call them like military leaders, and they were influenced by the West. Most of them were funded by the West, and by the West, I also mean Russia, like imperial Russia. Even though Russia is once it went socialist, it was like almost definitively the East. Um, the powers of remember these companies, remember these countries. It was Russia, France, and Britain. I believe it was Russia, France, and Britain who were setting up spheres of influence. China for sure, yeah. Who were setting up spheres of influence and backing warlords in uh in China. And so these warlords have split off different regions of China, and a lot of the a lot of the people in China were just suffering because of it, because these they were imperialized. They were used as essentially slave labor. They were doing work for damn near free, and China was definitely very, very split into many different factions. So we're going over the Sino-Japanese War. Actually, I'll do this. How about this?
1894 to 95 Sino-Japanese War. Humiliation from China's defeat by Japan in struggle for dominance in Korea.
Can y'all hear that?
1898. 100 days of reform under the Kwangsu Emperor. Thwarted by Empress Dowager Cixi and conservatives. Boxer Rebellion. 1899 to 1901 against foreigners.
I'm gonna pause it there. Because the main thing I want to focus on at this very moment is the Sino-Japanese War, because Japan had shut themselves off for years in order to keep. You can hear it good. Japan had shut themselves off for years, in order to like kind of self-isolate and build up their own country, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It was bad though when the United States in particular went to Japan and said, we want to trade with you. We want to take some of the things that you have for you, and we want to imperialize you. And that's exactly what happened. They forced Japan and to trade with them, and they implemented a bunch of what we call today unequal treaties, where Japan wasn't benefiting from these treaties. the same way that the United States were. They weren't benefiting from the treaties at all, to be honest with you. They were just being completely imperialized. But these unequal treaties in Japan, um, here it says unequal treaties refer to a series of agreements imposed to Japan by Western powers in the mid 19th century, primarily following the Commodore Perry's arrival in 1853. These treaties were characterized by a significant imbalance favoring the foreign nations at Japan's expense. This is mad important because, like, imperializing a place leads to multiple things. It leads to that place doing some form of uprising usually, but that uprising can be led by a plethora of different things. It could be led by someone who wants to be a king, a feudal lord. It could be led by someone who wants to be um like a socialist leader, like it did in China with Mao, or it can lead to just straight out fascism, which is what it actually ended up doing in Japan, and leading to the Sino-Japanese War. Because when Japan was being imperialized, they realized they didn't have any natural resources; they had nothing, and so they decided to go take some from their neighbors, and their direct close neighbor was Korea. It was Choson is what we'll call it. It was Choson. That's what they call Korea. That's what they called Korea before it was North and South Korea. Um, and so they went in there, and that's when they implemented the Sino-Japanese War in 1895 that we were talking about before right here, or sorry, 1894 to 1895, and defeated China and annexed Korea. Uh, that's when Japan's like imperialism took over Korea and ended up going later on into China. And those spheres of influence that we talked about before, with Russia at the time being a feudalist nation that was heavily backed by the West, and France and Britain, they told Japan to stop. They told Japan to stop going into China, and ended up setting up a bunch of their own spheres of influence, backing a bunch of warlords. I'm talking about Russia. Oh, I'm sorry. It wasn't Britain. It was Germany. I'm sorry. It was Britain later on, but it was Germany. It was Russia, France, and Germany were setting up spheres of influence and backing warlords in China that were taking over regions of China and sending natural resources from China to these other places. Um, we're good. Okay. So, uh, where was I? Uh, for your next test is so funny. This is just fiveable. I'm using right now this website. I'm just telling you it's fiveable. I think it's a blog spot. But you can look up the unequal treaties of Japan, the unequal treaties signed by the United States and Japan, and how it benefited the United States over um Japan. Uh the first Sino-Japanese War and the Kaohsiung incident. Um, basically, I believe this is. Hold on, let's just read it. Let's just read it all together. How about that?
During the 19th century, the need for admiralty foreign stations arose due to the expansion of European powers, colonial empires, and the increased global trade that resulted. These
Hmm.
stations were established by the British Royal Navy to maintain a permanent naval presence in key locations around the world. The Admiralty Foreign Stations were particularly important in securing and protecting the British Empire's interests in areas such as Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. They were also vital for responding to crises and conducting operations in remote areas of the world where the British Navy needed a permanent naval presence.
All right, so essentially, we're talking about setting up like this is just like straight out when people say imperialism, what they mean mostly by imperialism. Like when we socialists say imperialism, what we mean is that a country goes into another country, extracts resources from that country, makes a product, and then sells that product for more than what they extracted that product for, even to the country that they got the raw material from. So that is imperialism. It's the highest form of capitalism. But this particular imperialism is setting up this particular stage of imperialism is setting up essentially what we would later call military bases and military convoys in different areas of the world so that you can better protect whatever country or sorry companies that you put in certain countries to extract resources. And this was talking about the British Royal Navy doing that in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Right now, what we're essentially talking about. Thank you, Love Doctor, for the subscription. I appreciate you. You're awesome. Thank you for being here. But setting up these and this is how they were able to set up these spheres of influence and able to back all the other people who were setting up spheres of influence in these areas, in these imperialized areas. All right, and we're going to continue real quick.
Presence. In addition to their military role, Admiralty foreign stations also played an important diplomatic role. They served as centers for British diplomacy and influence in local affairs. A map of naval and coaling stations and submarine telegraphs 1879 to 1882.
All right, I'm gonna pause. So no, they actually don't. I thought they would. I don't know what this says over here. I can't read it. As well as I figure y'all can't read it. I figure it would just show us areas that Britain was in and had like spheres of influences. This makes sense because this is the United States, this is Canada, that's Britain. That's South Africa, which makes sense. British imperial forces in South Africa creating things like apartheid. Hey, no rats. Thank you so much. It's good to see me. Glad to see me on the tube. I'm trying. I'm doing my best. I'm trying out this what I sent you before. I'll talk to you about it later. This thing where if people want to debate, the link is in the description. If someone wants to debate, it's a Discord server. It leads you to a stage, and if you want to debate about something, like I don't know, capitalism is better than communism or something, you'll be able to do that. But yeah, South America, and then this is India, and then this is Australia. So this makes sense for to be the British. I'm not sure what that green area is. I wish I could read it. But it's a map of the coaling stations and submarine telegraphs in the from 1879 to 1872, or sorry, 1882. This is before the Sino-Japanese War. We're going to start from here real quick.
In this vlog, we will explore the First Sino-Japanese War between 1894 to 95 through the lens of the records in Admiralty China Station, ADM 125/112-114. This station was made up of 3 main bases in Hong Kong, Singapore, and Weihai, now Weihai. These records provide a unique and valuable perspective on the First Sino-Japanese War. They include correspondence, reports, and other documents related to the activities of the British naval forces stationed in China during the war.
So basically, they're just telling you that like where you can find more information about like the Sino-Japanese War. But yeah, like the British, here it is. Cause of the First Sino-Japanese. Let's start here. Let's go here real quick, because I think this is important information to know before we move on.
Cause of the First Sino-Japanese War. The Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to...
I'm gonna pause it for a second. Because this was funny. The YouTube crash outs are gonna be mwah, they're absolutely beautiful. You ain't never watched the YouTube live. It's so funny. You ain't never watched the YouTube live, and I'm the first one. That's awesome. Thank you for letting me be the first one. I appreciate you. All right.
Cause of the First Sino-Japanese War. The Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 1895 was a conflict between the Qing dynasty of China and the Empire of Japan over control of Korea and influence in East Asia. The war had significant implications for both countries and for the region as a whole, as it marked a shift in the balance of power in East Asia and the emergence of Japan as a major regional power.
See, that's like incredibly important. See how when Japan was being imperialized and put underneath these unequal treaties, sending all of their like resources to places like Britain and the United States due to these unequal treaties, going to go get uh resources from somewhere else, and imperializing other places was the only method that they saw fit. And so like the rise, like the rise of fascism in Japan for essentially almost a century to come. The what they ended up doing was they ended up, like I said before, annexing Korea and making their way into northern China, and they were stopped. But this annexing of Korea and imperializing Korea and taking resources from Choson, Korea, made them now someone who was able to be in the global conversation of a superpower. It made them super, like, in at least in the area, a superpower in the region of Asia.
Power. Both China and Japan viewed Korea as strategically important, as it provided access to important trade routes and markets. Japan sought to establish control over Korea in order to secure its own economic and strategic interests, while China sought to maintain its own influence over the peninsula. Control over Korea was seen as key to gaining dominance in the region. Outbreak of the war.
See, like, this is exactly what we just said. We're going to continue.
Va.
During the 19th century, Korean society was characterized by poverty, oppression by the ruling class, and peasant
It's going
uprisings.
into Korea.
In 1893, a significant movement was organized by the Tonghak's rebel peasant army against the ruling Joseon dynasty and its king, Gojong. The movement threatened to invade the Korean capital Seoul, take control, and drive the Japanese and all foreigners out of the country. This led to the Japanese and Chinese governments sending warships to prepare for emergencies, but the rebels were dispersed by the Korean soldiers and the matters quieted down for a time.
See, this is the part here where it needs to be said that the Chinese government is, it's not just one essential government. I mean, there is a government that everyone kind of like calls themselves from. Like today we call them Han Chinese. That's an ethnicity, but Han comes from the Han dynasty. The Han dynasty didn't even have like full blown control over China. They still had like different areas that were controlled by different, what today we would call them warlords, that were backed by Western forces. And so when they say these things, they mean like one of the warlords sent ships that they had gotten from one of their like imperialist forces. So maybe it was like a warlord in central China who got ships from, I don't know, Germany, and they sent them there. There's a whole thing here, but they're kind of skipping past it to tell you like exactly what started the outbreak of the war. I think that's what we need to like stop at here. This website here is, what's this website called? This website, oh, it's blog.nationalarchives.gov.uk. And it's the Sino-Japanese War and the Kaohsiung incident. Um, I just, there's a lot to go over, and I don't want to go over all of the history of China because like it will require me to go into the history of Korea as well, and Choson. But the history of Korea and Choson is, oh my God, there's so much there. Because China, Korea, and Japan are all like intertwined in like all of their yeah, and all of their history, except for that period of time where Japan shut itself off to the rest of the world. And Korea tried to do so too. I'm not going into Korea. I'm sorry. Never mind. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. See, right here where we see it says other powers involved. This is about the triple intervention. Other powers involved: Germany, France, and Japan. They were talking about, and it's organized by Russia. So Russia, Germany, and France were the ones that stopped Japan from moving into China during the Sino-Japanese War, where they went in and annexed Korea and tried to take over pretty much a bunch of different places. Glad to see you. Thank you. I'm glad to see you. You're awesome for being here. Right now we're just doing some history stuff, and I'm manning this Discord thing to try and figure out if people want to debate or whatever. But yeah, Germany, France, and Russia stopped Japan from going in after 1895 during the Sino-Japanese War, and told them, no, you don't get to do that. And this is about the agreement here. The main agreement to control Ladang Peninsula and Port Arthur was handed over to Russia in exchange for compensation. A joint Russian and Japanese uh, I don't even know how to say that. Matter of fact, let's just do this. This is about the agreement where France, Russia, and Germany said, hey, Japan, stop fucking doing that. And then they themselves started paying off warlords in the area, more so than they already were. Let's read from here.
Main agreements reached. Control of the Liaodong Peninsula and Port Arthur was handed over to Russia in exchange for compensation. A joint Russian and Japanese protectorate was established over Korea. The consequences of the agreements. Russia gained a warm water port in the Pacific. Russia supported German claims to Kiachao in 1898. Japan felt humiliated by the Triple Intervention and embarked upon a program of naval expansion.
So that embarking on a program of naval expansion is like really important, like really, really, really important. Especially if you're doing like something about World War II history. Um, but yeah, that's the agreement that they came to. They said you're going to stop invading China, and we're going to put this agreement in place. And what ended up happening was Russia gained a warm water port in the Pacific, and Russia supported German claim to Kaichau in 1898. And Japan felt humiliated by that because they were only able to set up Russia. It's important to understand that Russia at the time was imperialist, feudal nation. It wasn't the USSR yet. That didn't come until 1917. And this is 1895. This is leading to the Russian Japanese War of 1905. And we'll get there in like 2 seconds, because that's just really important into the history of China, because the fight was over China. Um, but the Russians, the French and Germans, they were able to set up these influences and these imperialized set up companies and things like that to extract resources, because Japan had gone in and weakened a bunch of the warlords in China. Like they were able to like set up even stronger spheres of influence in ports, like warm water ports in the Pacific. So this is a Russo-Japanese War that we was talking about before. After the bad agreement that was had, or at least bad for Japan agreement, the Japanese launched a surprise attack. It says the Japanese launched a surprise attack against Russian-held Port Arthur in 1904, beginning the Russo-Japanese War. This guide provides information and research in the topic. This is just talking about this. Where is it? This is guides.loc.gov. We're gonna start here. I think it'll start here. I think this will be
Late in
good.
the night on February 8th, 1904, Japan launched a surprise attack against the Russian-held Port Arthur along the coast of Manchuria, beginning the Russo-Japanese War. Russia faced many defeats as it battled Japan while also fighting a revolution on the home front. In September 1905, President Teddy Roosevelt negotiates peace between the two countries, earning him the Nobel Peace Prize. Read more about it.
So when it says Russia faced many defeats as as it battled Japan while it was fighting a revolution on the home front. This was 1905. 1905 was we'll talk about the Russian Revolution later on this channel here, but the Russian Revolution was in 19 well, that wasn't 1905. The Russian Revolution was in 1917, but a small revolution in 1905 and a big demonstration ended up happening where Russia has always been a really Christian nation. During the feudal times that we're talking about here, the king was is an autocracy where you rule by like they say that you were chosen by God, and you rule the country by religion, like you are the king, and that means you're the head of the church and all of this other stuff. That's what Russia had. And so they had always been like heavily Christian, and a bunch of Christians and priests had marched to the palace, and they were fired upon, and there was like a massacre, like 15 people unalived, just from marching. Like they just marched to the palace, and the guards opened fire on them. And that was a big instance of 1905. There was a big riot. We'll talk about it more when we talk about the October Revolution, but that was just like a big thing here because the Russo-Japanese War was something that the Russian at the time king needed. What was his name? I can't think of his name. Um, I cannot think of his name. It'll come to me in a minute. But he needed, because they had just massacred like 15 different people. But with Japan raging this war on Russia, it was a surprise because Japan won the war. Like this puny little nation beat this giant, what at the time superpower, who had spheres of influence all over the world and was backed by the West. It was insane. And I know you're asking, like, what does this have to do with China? What does this have to do with like the history of China? All of this is important is because they were fighting over China. China did not in itself, like when we talk about the Chinese government um before the revolution, there was no centralized government. There was a bunch of different people who sometimes signed treaties. There was a bunch of different territories. Essentially, like at certain points in time, China was basically 20 different countries in one, because different regions had totally different rules than other regions. And there was essentially an emperor of China, but it wasn't like how you see it in movies, or that it was very much split up. And that split made it so that they like those warlords can be influenced by the West or whoever else it may be. And Japan was competing with the West to take advantage of China and the resources that were in China. And they were fighting. They launched a surprise attack against Russia so that they could take over China, like they had wanted to do before in 1895. Um, the McDuckin incident of 1931. We're skipping to 1931, seeing as how Japan took over like China and set up a bunch of spheres of influence in China themselves. They they then staged an incident. Well, it's essentially, a lot of people say it was staged. A lot of people say it wasn't. I don't necessarily know. There's no like documentation for any of it. But the whole point here is that like in Manchuria, a railway was blown away, and Japan made an excuse to continue to launch a war um into China and invade China. So there was a whole instance there where China was heavily imperialized by Japan. Um but yeah, that was a whole thing. And like the Sino-Japanese conflict happened during the time of the rise of fascism in Europe. So as you can see here, it's 1931. This is around the time Benito Mussolini took office, around the time that just around the time that Adolf Hitler took office in Germany, and they were Adolf Hitler was going to places in uh, Eastern Europe, and they were just saying this is Germany now, and appeasement was happening with the I think it's called like later on it's called the United Nations. It's called the League of Nations back then. I'm not 100% sure what it was called before that, but whatever fucking treaty everyone had signed and organization everyone was with, they were appeasing Germany. And Italy had just taken over parts of the Middle East, and so Japan was taking over parts, especially since they had won the war against Russia. They had no one to stop them from taking over northern China, and this is where they did the instant the people say that they staged the instance in Manchuria where a railway was blown up, and so they launched an invasion into China. And this is where you saw the instance of Nanking. We're not going to talk too much about Nanking. Just know that it was a horrible instance where Japan did very terrible things to a bunch of Chinese citizens. So this here leads to big conflicts. I don't know what just happened. Um, hmm. I don't know what just happened. I think it just got rid of one of my pages, and I don't know why it did that. But essentially, this led to the civil war in China. So there was a giant dispute in China over the people being imperialized. There was a lot going on with the people essentially starving, and there was a bunch of different like emperors that were trying to consider themselves like a part of like the main part of China. But the main emperor at the time had just been overthrown, and a new emperor had arose, and his name was Chiang Kai-shek. And Chiang Kai-shek had a lot of influence with a lot of the warlords that were influenced by the West. Um, and he was like, at least for him, he was like just very convincing towards all these warlords because he was very subservient himself to the West. And in order to battle some of the things that in order to battle some of the things in order to in order to push away a lot of the Japanese influence and some of the West, he looked to some of the rising movements at the time. Because, like I said, when a country is heavily imperialized, it can lead to multiple different things. And one of the things in China and different areas of China, especially in northern China, was a socialist movement, a communist movement, and that was led by none other than Mao Zedong. And Mao Zedong was approached by Chiang Kai-shek, and he said, can you help me push out some of this Japanese influence? And Mao said, yeah, absolutely, we can do that. And they did that. And then he did it under the guise of uniting China under one banner. A big part of like Asia is uniting countries because like the countries are usually like very split up. This is why like a big part of like today's topic when we talk about North and South Korea, why North and South Korea is like such a hot topic, especially for North and South Koreans, because like the unification of Asian countries is like a big thing, because oftentimes they were like, especially back in the 1800s, they were super heavily imperialized, and um it was hard to keep the country together because different warlords and whoever else would have different influences based like different imperial influences. So but Mao Zedong came up with a strategy called the Protracted People's War. And the goal of the strategy, I can't believe it just took away my thing. I'm actually a little pissed off about that, but I'm gonna look for that, and I'm gonna let this
The goal
Read.
is to identify and review the main features of the People's War Strategy developed by Mao Zedong using the legacy of traditional Chinese philosophical and political culture to defeat the Japanese regular troops and take power in the country by the Communist Party of China. Research methods include components of military history.
I'll pause it because this is talking about the research methods that they did. I only got the abstract here. That they did in order to figure out the protracted People's War. I had a thing up here talking about the protracted People's War. Um, Let me see if I can get it back. Give me like 2 seconds here. To see if I can get it back. Um, yeah. I Manchuria. No. Oh my goodness. Hold on. I'll be right back. Give me like 2 seconds, y'all. All right, we're back. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Here we go. This is better. So, the conceptualization of Maoism is actually really important, especially to what we're talking about today. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because it's Martin Luther King Day, and I made a joke on I made a joke on Blue Sky that said MLK means Marxist Leninist King, but like honestly, the Black revolutionary thought process has gone down the Marxist Leninist route in the United States more so than anything else, and Maoism has played a big part in that. Before the even conceptualization of Maoism, the utilization of Maoism and the strategies of Mao were adopted by Black liberation groups such as like the Black Panthers, who we're going to talk about the most today. Um, and I actually had a shirt on earlier that said Fred Hampton was murdered, but I put on the dress for stream. But we're gonna go over real quick what Maoism is, because this is what I had up before and it took it away. I don't know why it took it away, but this is MHA.gov, and this is it's just oh my god, this is a weird. there's no title. It just says LWE FAQs underscore 2201 2016. If you're looking for any of these sources, and I'll be posting these sources in different areas, especially like in the Discord. So if you're not in my Discord, join my Discord. Um, and I'll put a link to my Discord and my on my YouTube as well. But hold on, we'll go over what is Maoism really quickly.
Case 1. What is
That's
Maoism?
question one.
Answer. Maoism is a form of communism developed by Mao Zedong. It is a doctrine to capture state power through a combination of armed insurgency, mass mobilization, and strategic alliances. The Maoists also use propaganda and disinformation against state institutions as other components of their insurgency doctrine. Mao called this process the protracted People's War, where the emphasis is on military line to capture power. Case 2. What is the central theme of Maoist ideology? Answer. The central theme of Maoist ideology is the use of violence and armed insurrection as a means to capture state power. Bearing of arms is non-negotiable, as per the Maoist insurgency doctrine. The Maoist ideology glorifies violence, and the People's Liberation Guerrilla Army, PLGA, cadres are trained specifically in the worst forms of violence to evoke terror among the population under their domination. However, they also use the subterfuge of mobilizing people over issues of purported inadequacies of the existing system so that they can be indoctrinated to take recourse to violence as the only means of redressal.
So that was a lot to go over. So we're gonna start here at what is Maoism. Maoism is a form of communism developed by Mao Zedong. It's more of a form of Marxism in order to achieve communism in a socialist society. But either way, it's a form of communism, obviously developed by Mao. It's a doctrine to capture state power through a combination of armed insurgency, mass mobilization, and strategic alliance. But it's also like strategic movements. So like the protracted People's War is a multitude of things, and it's essentially based upon like strategic victories. So it talks about like the offensive of the state that is happening right now, the offensive that we will put towards the state's strategic, like our strategic, while we're enduring the violence of the state, our strategic like a building during our assault that is happening to us by the state, and then our strategic attack of the state and the state's strategic retreat. And you can't know like exactly what order that will go in or what place you're in. You just have to kind of like work with the areas in which you're in. But yeah, so when it says Mao called this process the protracted People's War, that is true. In Mao's particular instance, he got the farmlands that were surrounding the inner cities to rise up and realize that they were being imperialized, and then they converged on the intercities, all united under one banner in a socialist movement, and they call themselves the People's Liberation Army. In different areas this works in different ways, but it mostly works in like majorly imperialized areas. But where it says here the Maoists sorry where it says here the Maoists also use propaganda and disinformation against the state. Uh, I feel as though that's like against Maoism to say it in that way, but it uses disinformation that the state uses in order to, or it points out disinformation that the state uses in order to point out like the inadequacies of the state. And we do that today all the time. Like the other day, when TikTok went down, and everyone like TikTok sent the message was like, "Thank you, President Trump, for bringing TikTok back," and blah 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 blah. But the whole point is that TikTok never had to go down, and the people that created this like illusion of TikTok needing to go away were President Trump and his people. Like that's just true. That's just how that happened. And to thank a person for bringing something back even though they're the person who took it away was absolutely insane. That's disinformation, and that is just allowing people to think that like Donald Trump did something good or whatever else it may be, when he was actually the villain the whole time. Um, and Maoism, in our strategies, like today's Maoists would look to like point something like that out, right? And look to point out things about like the disinformation of the state that happens just on a daily basis. Like, how many people have you ever heard talk about socialism or communism, and they have no fucking idea what it is? They think that it's something like, they go, "Oh, socialism is when the government owns everything," right? Like, that's disinformation that the State Department of the United States puts out there that Maoists look to tackle. And that's mad important because at this point in time, those spheres of influence in China, and at least and the influencers that are here in the United States, like, rely on that. And I can't even emphasize enough how much they rely on that disinformation, and you just falling for it and saying like, "Oh yeah, 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 communism bad because the state told me." Like, and you don't even think the state told you. They always equate it to fascism when they're diametrically opposed. Literally, this, Adam, they literally always like say something is fascist. It's so crazy because like all of the stuff that you've heard about me talk about, and if we were to go into Nanking or whatever else, but all the stuff that you heard me talk about today, you've heard the West and the, like, especially the United States government say this about a different socialist experiment. Like, you would think that like the Russo-Japanese War, according to the United States, happened between the USSR and Japan over influence of China so that they can both take over China. And nowadays that China is in the conversation for a global superpower, and is doing things in different places in different parts of the world, you hear this rhetoric about the things that the United States is doing, but just saying that China is doing it. You hear this rhetoric of the state in saying that China is doing something like, "Oh, China is imperializing Africa. China is imperializing the Middle East. China is doing this, and China's imperializing Formosa." That's insane. Formosa is Taiwan. That's insane. That's insane to say. Like, because we're doing that. Like, we're absolutely doing that. We just need there to be no competition. And by we, I mean the United States, the imperial course. So Britain's doing that. Germany's doing that. France is doing that. The United States is doing that. Like, the imperial cores are doing that. The imperial core, no one has ever said how bad, well, that's not true. Leftists have, but outside of leftists, you don't hear Democrats talking about how bad it is for the Congo that the United States is in the Congo, but you will hear them talk about China in the Congo. You don't hear about how bad it is for the United States to be in Iraq, but you will hear about them talking about the USSR in Iraq. Like, you don't hear these things, even though we see with our own eyes. We'll see something that's happening in the United States doing it, and the state entities pushing out disinformation and relying on you to just believe that disinformation. Um and these are the kinds of things that tell you communism's bad, communism's bad, communism's bad. And during these times where China is uprising against uh or at least the Chinese, the People's Liberation Army, Maoist China, I would say, is uprising against what they call the Kumite, yeah, the what did they call it? The PRC, the People's Republic of China, is what they called it. Chiang Kai-shek's China. And Chiang Kai-shek was really influenced by the West, was super heavily influenced by the West. During the Korean War, we'll talk more about Chiang Kai-shek, because I'll do something about Korea in particular, and their plight to independence, the DPRK in particular, and their plight to independence, because South Korea still doesn't have independence. Let's be so fucking honest. That is an American puppet state, but we'll get into that in a little while. But yeah, we'll go into Korea because all of these are intertwined. Like the Japan, China, and Korea, their histories are extremely intertwined because Korea was heavily influenced by China, but wasn't necessarily imperialized by China. But they were absolutely imperialized by Japan. Um, but anyway, the Maoist ideology of the we went off on a tangent, I'm sorry. But the Maoist ideology of the protracted People's War and Maoism is like extremely important here, because the protracted People's Wars would cause the downfall of the Kuomintang and the People's Republic of China, and force Chiang Kai-shek to leave China and unite China, and that united China under one banner of socialism, in Maoist China. So W Mao for that. Um, let's do what's the central themes. I think this is good, and then we can move on
Case
from
2.
here.
What is the
Question 2.
central theme of Maoist ideology? Answer. The central theme of Maoist ideology is the use of violence and armed insurrection as a means to capture state power. Bearing of arms is non-negotiable, as per the Maoist insurgency doctrine.
Real quick, it's strategic violence. It's not just like senseless violence. It's very strategic. Like Maoism is about strategy. It is about like war strategy, especially. When Mao went in and took over China from the People's Republic of China, what he did was is that he he enforced like these specific rules on his own people. And this is rumors, but like the people who were doing it really have no reason to lie, because it'll be like Japanese soldiers that they interviewed, like that Russia interviewed later on, or like Japanese soldiers that were, or like German soldiers or whoever that was in the area. Um, uh, FBA men lack manhood, nothing new. That doesn't mean anything. You're not saying anything. But anyway, the um the point here is that like with the guerrilla army and the People's Liberation Army, it says People's Liberation Guerrilla Army, but People's Liberation Army implemented strategic violence, to the point where the same thing happened with the Koreans, when they did revolutionary action and whatever else. They still paid for things from like farmers. Like they wouldn't steal food, they would go pay the farmers for food. um and the farmers being paid for food, once the money turned out to be useless, they weren't mad at the people who paid for the food. They were mad at the people who made the money useless. So now the revolutionaries are not their targets. And action against when they did action against the the powers that be, they didn't do the actions against the revolutionaries. Like that's just how that went. That's just how that went. Here, I'm gonna put you in timeout. You get a 10-minute timeout. There you go. Enjoy that. Anyway, like I was saying before, so yeah, the Maoist insurgency, it says here, the Maoist insurgency doctrine implements the idea of violence and the use of violence, the ideology and the use of violence. It's strategic violence. It's always going to be strategic violence. Adam, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine, Adam. These people are so pathetic. Like it's so pathetic. Like how bad they are. Like, and like it says, if you want to debate me, there's a whole thing down there, where you can join the Discord and whatever else, and I'll turn on my microphone and just like dog walk you in front of all the people who are listening in and watching or whatever. But the whole point here is that we're talking about China. Fuck that nigga. Anyway, um but yeah, bearing arms is non-negotiable, and that is 100% true, because Mao said political power comes at the barrel of a gun. But we're going to continue here.
Doctrine.
The Maoist ideology glorifies violence, and the People's Liberation Guerrilla Army, PLGA, cadres are trained specifically in the worst forms of violence to evoke terror among the population under their domination. However, they also use the subterfuge of mobilizing people over issues of purported inadequacies of the existing system, so that they can be indoctrinated to take recourse to violence as the only means of redressal. Case 3. Who are the Indian Maoists?
We'll go into the Indian Maoists another time, but this is all we need to hear here. about what Maoism is and the strategies of Maoism, because doing violence kind of randomly and ambushing different factions of soldiers is an amazing fucking tactic. It's actually how Che Guevara and Fidel Castro won the revolution over in Cuba. We'll talk about that in a different video as well. But they took these strategies, they took that strategy from Mao. They took the strategy from there because the strategic violence and the use of violence against imperialized forces and like opposing armies weakens them. It weakens them, especially psychologically, and using terroristic tactics against the army, but not against the people, makes the people, when the money and whatever else that they have is deemed useless and their work is deemed useless, and they realize that they're being imperialized and they're being used, it makes them angry at the army. But then the army doesn't have the mental fortitude to fight both the people and the revolutionaries. Like, they just don't have it, and so they give up and they run away. And this is exactly what ends up happening. That's the strategic retreat of the State Department, and the strategic offensive of the revolution. And that's what Mao talked about, and it's actually super important, because when we get into what Maoism is, this is finally the strategy of the protracted People's War. Here, this is just the abstract, but I thought it would tell us what it was. But essentially, I'm actually gonna get rid of that. But essentially, it goes into what the race question is. We're gonna read this whole thing here. And I'm gonna break it down little piece by piece, kind of stanza by stanza, to talk about what Mao thought about what's off topic. Oh, I'll read in a second. What Mao thought about it's called the racial question. Is a class question, and we're going to talk about how this makes the racial question is absolutely incredibly important, because, and especially making it a class question, because it talks about how social classes are just as important as economic classes. But we'll get into that in like 2 seconds. I'm gonna read this. What's the difference between China's and Vietnam's tactics, other than Vietnam being fairly simple and rudimentary in their tools? We'll go over Vietnam as well. Vietnam was awesome. Vietnam had been fighting off the French. Like I said, the French had been setting up spheres of influence in Asia. They had also set up spheres of influence in China, and they had been imperializing China and Vietnam for a long time. But the Vietnamese were fighting against the French for years before the United States went in. But we'll go over that. One of the biggest things when it comes to the difference of like strategies is that Mao's strategy was to get the countryside and converge inward, because the countryside was kind of on the, I don't want to say it was on the coast, but it was definitely surrounding like the capital, what we would call it, of China. And he unified the farmers and converged in, whereas Vietnam is a country that kind of looks like, if you've ever seen Chile, where it's just like one big long country, so there is no real converging. There's just, like, at the time there was north and south, and the northern Vietnamese were going down, but they just used a lot of guerrilla tactics in the jungle and whatever else. The strategy was essentially the same when it comes to the protracted People's War, with strategic attacks and strategic things that they would do to mess with the mental fortitude of especially American soldiers, whilst not attacking the citizens, whereas Americans were attacking the citizens. And then the Americans just didn't have enough to fight the citizens and the revolutionaries. Same tactic essentially, but they were just using different methods because the country was set up different. We'll go over that in a different video as well. We'll go over a bunch of different revolutions. But Mao here, using the protracted People's War, had visitors from Africa. This is in 1963, and this is after he took over the country, made Chiang Kai-shek run away to Formosa, and they renamed that Taiwan. Which we'll get into that in a little bit. I mean, don't get me started on Taiwan. Right now, the racial question is the class question. Start here. How about that?
The racial question is a class question. August 9th, 1963. Source. This is the full text of Comrade Mao's remarks to his African visitors on this occasion, as reported in Genmin Jaipao on August 9th, 1963. Chairman Mao Zedong received visitors from Africa here this afternoon, August 8th, 1963. During the reception, Chairman Mao Zedong made a statement calling upon the people of the world to unite against racial discrimination by U.S. imperialism and support the American Negroes in their just struggle against racial discrimination.
So, well, I forgot to give the warning. This was written in 1963. So they were using terms like Negroes and whatever else. Just means black people. But we'll move on from that.
Discrimination. Chairman Mao Zedong had a very cordial, friendly talk with the friends from Africa. During the talk, he condemned the racial discrimination practiced by U.S. imperialism, as well as that of the colonialist authorities of South Africa and in every part of the world. Racial discrimination, he said, is found in Africa, in Asia, and in other parts of the world. The racial question is, in essence, a class question.
It's important to say that because the racial question is in essence a class question, means that it's obviously different. Like, you can't just get rid of class and expect racism to go away, but you can put race in a category, especially of a social class category, and say that they are using race in order to create deeper class issues. And this is Mao's, like, I think Mao's a genius. Mao's like thought process in 1963, none other. And he's condemning the imperial forces of South Africa, and saying, in particular, and saying that racial discrimination, both found in Africa and Asia and other parts of the world, of course, but especially Africa and Asia, is made it a class question. That's really fucking important because during the Korean War, I'm just going to go over this for like 2 seconds. During the Korean War, you saw when Mao had gathered a bunch of troops and sent them into Korea to fight a defensive war and to defend the area that Korea had taken, the DPRK, North Korea had taken. um the rhetoric of the United States soldiers, the rhetoric of the UN soldiers that were there was not the rhetoric of even giving a shit about of Korean people, and even thinking of them as people. They called them slurs. They called them, they just, like, outwardly, like, that's all they called them was slurs. They did not determine them as people, to the point where UN reporters, people who worked for the UN, who were doing reports during the war, was like, yeah, the American soldiers did not refer to a man, a woman, a child in Korea as a man, a woman, or a child. They were all just insert slur. It was like a dead slur is a good slur. This, that, and the other. Look at that slur over there. And it was a 4-year-old kid. Like, they did not consider Koreans as people. And same thing with China. They don't consider any person of color as people. They just don't. And so these are racial questions because these people are obviously not white. But yeah, this is a racial question in which, like, these imperialized areas of the world have had like this incredible like colonialist hegemony enacted upon them. Hegemony just means like the major powers that be. This colonial influence, I guess I will say, and being imperialized, taking resources from these places, having their people unalived for no reason whatsoever, and being called slurs during the wars that they did not themselves start. Other people started, but they finished, and they were called slurs because of it. And now In 1963, they're doing it like Mao looks out into the world and they realize, oh wow, we're not the only ones who they're doing it to. They're also doing it to Africa. And so he condemns them in Africa doing that and saying like these wars are ones of white supremacy. These wars that they wage upon Asian countries and that they wage upon African countries are wars of white supremacy, and they are using white supremacy in order to create a deeper class division. Uh, we'll start from here. We'll start from our unity is not one of race.
Our,
Oh, here it is.
our unity is not one of race. It is the unity of comrades and friends. We should strengthen our unity and wage a common struggle against imperialism, colonialism, and the running dogs to attain
They
complete
didn't say
and
that right.
thorough national independence and liberation.
They didn't say that right. Mao said running when Mao said running dogs, he called them the running dogs of capitalism. That's what he said. And this was like a Chinese thing, calling you a dog. It's just meant to be like just like gut wrenching. It was when if you heard Mao say it, it was insane. It's actually very poetic when you hear him talk about it.
Liberation. After explaining how China's revolutionary struggle had won through to victory, Chairman Mao said, "This proves that a revolution by the people can triumph and that imperialism and its running dogs can be defeated. The tide of anti-imperialism and anti-colonialism is sweeping through all Africa. All countries, whether or not they have already attained independence, will sooner or later win complete and thorough independence and liberation. All the Chinese people support you. The people of Africa are awakening with each passing day. So are the people of the whole world. The workers, peasants, revolutionary intellectuals, and all other revolutionary people, who constitute over 90% of the world's population, can be united in the fight for the victory of the revolution."
This is mad important too when saying to Africans that all of China supports you is because back when this was in 1963, this was directly after, not directly after, but a little bit after Cuba had just won its revolution, and they had the support of Russia. They had the support of the USSR. Um, so getting support from China was incredibly like looked upon as something that was like that was super duper awesome because China is the one who started all of that, like giving support from comrades to comrades. Seeing as how like the USSR did nothing for Korea. I mean, they sent tanks and they sent airplanes, but they didn't send a lot of tanks. They didn't send a lot of airplanes. They sent no troops. And the troops that came were Chinese troops. And those Chinese troops kicked the American and the UN troops' ass. And they kicked them out of Korea. Like they literally made them retreat and run away from Korea. And so after that, and like this is in the 1950s. And this is in the 1950s, they send the troops to Korea. China sends troops to Korea. This is 1963, a little over that, a little about 10, 13 years over China kicking out, actually less than that because it was, I think the Korean War ended in 1955. So it's 1963, a little less than 10 years after that. China's like, yeah, we kicked their ass in Korea, we can kick their ass in South Africa too, is essentially what he's telling his visitors who are themselves Black Africans. And that was a big thing because every time comrades were sent somewhere, the people win the war. When comrades are sent, or even just materials are sent to Cuba, they win the war. When materials and comrades are sent to Korea, they win the war. Like like so comrades supporting comrades is like really really important. um and there's just this whole thing. We'll go over when we go over the Korean War. We'll go over Stalin crying. Mao wrote him a letter. Mao was so poetic. He wrote Stalin a letter, and it made Stalin cry. Like it made him actually cry. We'll get into that. We'll continue.
Revolution. In the fight for thorough emancipation, Chairman Mao said, the oppressed peoples rely first of all on their own strength and then, and only then, on international assistance. The people who have already won victory in their revolution should help those who are still struggling for liberation. This is our internationalist duty. Transcription by the Maoist Documentation Project.
That's the whole thing. That's his whole thing. At least what they've given us here about his racial question is a class question. It was just kind of a quote here, and this is mad important because it's 1963, and it's during the year of the signing of um uh Civil Rights Act. And so when black people hear about this, especially the Panthers, um the Black Panthers took it and they kind of like ran with it, and they understood it. The Black Panthers, obviously created by Bobby Seale and Huey Newton. Huey Newton actually loved Mao. They loved Mao like so much. They literally went to like a used bookstore, bought all of the red books, and then sold them on the street for $1. Mao's Little Red Book, and sold them on the street for $1. Real quick, we'll go over the Black Panthers.
Black Panther Party, African American Revolutionary Party, founded in 1966 in Oakland, California, by Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale. The party's original purpose was to patrol African American neighborhoods to protect residents from acts of police brutality. The Panthers eventually developed into a Marxist revolutionary group that called for the arming of all African Americans, the exemption of African Americans from the draft.
See, this it's mad important too to talk about the reason, like, because since we went over before that Maoism, when were here, and it was the Q&A here about Maoism and the strategic strategies of Mao, and talking about the how it's bearing of arms is non-negotiable here, right here. The bearing of arms is non-negotiable as per Maoist insurgery doctrine. The bearing of arms is in every group that is going to like have any form of conceptualization of Maoism is going to want to bear arms. So it makes sense that the purpose of the Black Panthers, at least for a time being, is to arm the Black community. And because that is a non-negotiable thing. The political power comes at the barrel of a gun, as said by Mao. They're conceptualizing Maoism. They are influenced by Mao, and so it makes sense that they would focus on arming Black people as one of the first things, seeing as how that is how you fight a revolution, as per the Maoist doctrine. Is not gonna. Okay,
Draft
there
and
we
from
go.
all sanctions of so-called white America, the release of all African Americans from jail, and the payment of compensation to African Americans for centuries of exploitation by white Americans. At its peak in the late 1960s, Panther membership exceeded 2,000, and the organization operated chapters in several major American cities.
So yeah, this was like the this oh, excuse me. Hold on. Oh, excuse me. Oh, excuse me. I don't know why that happened. I'm sorry. Oh gosh. Okay. Um so Black Panther Party, arming Black people, conceptualizing Maoism. The reason why we went over the history here in Asia, especially of the bless up, thank you so much. I appreciate you. You're awesome. Mwah. Um, the reason why we went over the history of Asia, bless me, thank you, thank you all. I appreciate you. The reason why we went over the history here in Asia, especially of the of Japan. That's I couldn't think of the word. I didn't think of the country of Japan going into China, especially. I think it's mad important, especially when we're talking about the imperialized nations, because these things in the imperialism of Japan, the spheres of influence set up by France. There it is, by France, Russia, and Germany. Uh, the implementation of warlords to split up China, the non-unification of China, and then the rise of the Chinese, what do we call the Chinese Communist Party? It's actually uh, the Communist Party of China, or sorry, the Chinese Party of Communism, is what it is, the CPC. But either way, this uh, China's socialist movement um, is because that is what imperialism does. And this imperialism leads Mao to this thought process right here of the racial question is class question. There's no way that it didn't. There's no way that it. How else would you say this? Understanding the imperialism in your country, and this isn't Mao isn't the only one who did this. When we talk about later on, when we talk about the Vietnam War and we talk about Ho Chi Minh, a big part of Ho Chi Minh's analysis was the analysis of Black people being imperialized, like even within their own countries. Like super exploited versus the exploited. That's a Frantz Fanon thing. But the whole point here is that like it led them to this. The racial question is a class question, and that led to like the conceptualization of Maoism, especially within the Black Panther Party and the strategies of the Black Panther Party in the 1960s and 70s. That being armed people and implementing ideas and taking away disinformation that is fed to people by the state. That is mad important to understand, because when it comes to being imperialized, like we talked about over here, in this brief history of China and Japan's instances with Russia fighting over China and who's going to be the imperial force of China, and then World War II, where Japan is taking over China, and then in being heavily influenced by the United States, and China not allowing for westernized powers like to interfere in their country today. Like it shows you what is the thought process of people, not people, but the government of China today, and shows you why like the Chinese government doesn't allow for certain things or whatever else, right? Um when this whole thing, let 100 Panthers bloom, is actually awesome, because directly after China's revolution, Mao did a thing where he said, "Let 100 flowers blossom." And what he was talking about was is that he'll stay there and talk about whatever it is that he did wrong, and allow people to talk about whatever it is that he did wrong for however long they want to talk about it, because he wanted notes about how to better run China and what the people wanted from him and what the people were expecting from him. And he said, "Let 100 flowers blossom," and this says, "Let 100 panthers bloom." Um, and we're going to talk about here the influence that Mao had, especially in the Black Panther Party. Let's start here.
Chairman Mao says that death comes to all of us, but it varies in its significance. To die for the reactionary is lighter than a feather. To die for the revolution is heavier than Mount Tai. So wrote Huey P. Newton, founder of the Black Panther Party, in the opening pages of his 1973 memoir, Revolutionary Suicide. Newton wished to be as monumental as Tai, a famously large Chinese mountain, and he wrote, I do not expect to live through our revolution. Mao was a hero to Newton, who co-founded the Black Panther Party 50 years ago on October 15, 1966, the same year Mao kicked off the Cultural Revolution in China. The controversial radical group, which at its peak reached thousands of members, suffered deaths both revolutionary and reactionary.
This is important because understand, if you ever read Revolutionary Suicide, or if you haven't, I'm just going to go over some small things within it. Huey puts quotes by a lot of people who influenced him, but this is how we know that Mao was like one of the big influences of him, because he set the founding date for the same day that Mao kicked off the revolution, after what they called the Long Walk. We'll go over that in a little bit. After what they called the Long Walk. Um, but the uh but the strategies themselves are just, it's impossible not to see the parallels here and the influence that Mao had on Huey.
Reactionary. Some died in shootouts with police. Some fell to factionalism and internal killings. Some died in prison. 14 Chicago police officers famously killed 2 young Panthers in a 1969 raid. A grand jury later found that the officers fired 76 bullets to just 1 return shot.
Oh, we'll play that.
Mao's teachings were, alongside other role models like Malcolm X and Che Guevara, a guiding light of Panther philosophy.
So like it's exactly this. Um but yeah, the whole point here is that like Mao influenced Huey heavily, and that led into what the Panthers tried to do, which was create factions all throughout the United States. And since Huey couldn't do a long walk, because the long walk was a big part of Mao's revolutionary thing. His long walk was, he walked from the south of China to the west of China, from the west of China to the north of China. Like he did essentially a big long walk, and he was gathering people and troops and along the way to fight with him, um, in a socialist a revolution. I really had no idea Mao had such an impact on and such an influence as figures as Malcolm X and Che Guevara. No, 100%. Like Che Guevara utilized the protracted People's War in Cuba. That's how they won. Like, I'm not bullshitting. The long walk where Mao went from the south of China to the west of China, from the west of China to the north of China, while he was gathering people along the way. Like I said, he was gathering people who were farmers and people who worked doing whatever coal jobs, coal mining, whatever it may be, just kind of outdoorsy jobs, and then converged in on the middle. That's exactly the strategy that Che and Fidel utilized. They went from I mean, Cuba's an island, but they went from the south of the island, moving towards the north of the island, because that's where the farms were, and they were teaching people how to read. It wasn't black people, because black people were the slaves, but they were teaching people how to read, and they were telling people about like the inadequacies of the United States imperial government, and they marched into the Capitol and unalived like a bunch of Francisco Batista soldiers who were backed by the United States. And that was their version of the long walk. Like they were walking from one part of Cuba to another part of Cuba, gathering farmers and outdoor workers, what is it, sugarcane farmers, and different kinds of farmers, plantain farmers, all this other shit, and getting them to revolt against their essentially slave owners and march into the capital whilst arming them. And they relied on the state's strategic retreat, which was one of Mao's big thing, and the protracted People's War. It was the exact same thing. It was the exact same strategy. Mao's protracted People's War. I'm not a Maoist myself. I'm a Marxist, but I'm not a Maoist. But I do have to say, Mao's strategy is universal. It is so universal. Like you can use it anywhere. Like you just have to be willing to do the things that Mao did. And what the Black Panther Party tried to do was they tried to get as many factions in the US and around the US as they possibly could to overthrow the US government. But they never overthrew the US government. But they did get, again, 2,000 members, and they were international. There was a faction in uh, uh, in England. Was it England or was it just because the UK is England? I don't know if it was in England or if it was in the UK. Because if it was in the UK, it might have been in Ireland. But the whole point is that there was a faction somewhere over there. It was not in the United States. 2,000 members, and they had different factions, different state, and a bunch of different states with all of these members, and that was going to be their version of the long walk, and because you couldn't just walk across the United States. I mean, you could, but like you didn't do that in the 1960s, right? Like it wasn't super heavily agrarian where you could just go from place to place to place, place. So their version of the long walk was uniting people uh all around the United States to try and like kind of converge on the capital. Didn't necessarily work, but you know, hey, you can try. But this was heavily influenced by Mao. This was 100% influenced by Mao. Um, uh, let's see this real quick.
A defining moment in the history of U.S. radicalism's Maoist turn remains Black Panther Party, BPP, founder Bobby Seale's recollection of the role of quotations from Chairman Mao in building the Panthers' organization and ideology. As Seale recalls it, in early 1967, he and Huey Newton came up with the idea of purchasing 60 copies of the Little Red Book from China Bookstore in San Francisco in
Hmm.
order to sell them for $1 apiece on the University of California, Berkeley campus.
Yeah, we
The
talked
money
about
was to be
this.
used to purchase weapons to arm BPP members against police brutality on the streets of Oakland. Ideologically, Seale writes, the book also became the Panthers' urtext for internationalizing Black struggle in the USA.
So like, so this is just this is Cambridge, um, Cambridge University, going over. This is just a summary of this book talking. I guess a book talking about the influence of uh Mao and the protracted People's War on the Black Panther strategy. One second here, I had an itch on my foot. Um, but yeah, take selling Mao's Little Red Book. I actually have Mao's Little Red Book around here somewhere, but selling Mao's Little Red Book for $1 and getting as much money as they could to buy weapons, so that they can employ Mao's strategy. Like that's it doesn't get any more influential than that. Um, yeah, I don't even know what else to say. It's kind of said it all there. But they implemented other programs as well because, like I said before, Maoism was a um. Could you include all or at least a good portion of these sources in the Discord? I'll be providing all these sources in the Discord. Um, but thank you, Siobhan, for doing that. By the way, I appreciate you. Um, the but yeah, the Black Panthers also took the strategy of doing things for the people and pointing out inadequacies. One of the ways that Maoism points out the inadequacies is that they do shit to provide shit for people. Like they did shit during the revolution to provide things for people, like literally buying fruit from farmers rather than like just taking fruit from the farmers. Um, and then uh setting up programs after the revolution was won to redistribute land, to give education to those who didn't have like a formal education, to give housing, all this other shit, and that land reform, housing reform, all of that created what like influences around the world, and the Black Panthers called it the survival programs, Black Panther Party community survival programs. As a matter of fact, here, let's just do this. There we go.
Black Panther Party Community Survival Programs 1967, 1982 asterisk. The Black Panther Party developed many early social programs that was based off the immediate needs of the community. These pioneering acts to improve the conditions of the people are often unacknowledged by historians as being the first to inspire nationwide programs to aid various oppressed communities.
We'll go
Read
over
on
that
for full
why in
list
a
of the
little bit.
programs. Free Food Program. 10,000
Oops, I did
tea
not
out.
mean to do that.
Manage 10,000 bags of groceries were given to Oakland's community in 1972. Children's Breakfast Program. Free Clothing Program. Ohio, 1970. Photography by Stephen Shames and BPP Resources. Alameda County Volunteer. Benefit Council.
So like yeah, free food, free children's breakfast program, free clothing program, a grocery program, all of these things were influenced by Mao and the Maoist strategy. Not necessarily the protracted people's war, because that's a strategy for war, but definitely for building the community after the revolution, giving things out like land reform. They couldn't do land reform, so they gave out groceries. The reason why they did land reform was because when you give people land, the productivity goes up, and so people grow more food, they grow more stuff, and the harvest tends to do better. Which is exactly what happened in Korea and China when land reform ended up happening. But they didn't have land; they couldn't give land. So what did they do? They gave away groceries. They gave away the thing that the land would give you. They gave away fresh foods. They gave away clothes. They gave away breakfast for kids, so that it could be so that not only could the kids eat when they got home with the grocery program, giving their kids groceries, but they eat at school and make sure that in the places, because school is 8 hours a day, it's like a job. In the place that you're spending 8 hours, you have something to eat, and they called them survival programs. Um, but this is I said before, the reason why that the government would refuse to acknowledge that the Black Panthers did these programs, or that they were like super heavily, like the free food programs today are super heavily influenced by the Black Panthers. This goes over this is History Channel, going over how the Black Panthers breakfast program both inspired and threatened the government. um let's go over this real quick.
In 1969, a group of children sat down to a free breakfast before school. On the menu, chocolate milk, eggs, meat, cereal, and fresh oranges. The scene wouldn't be out of place in a school cafeteria these days, but the federal government wasn't providing the food. Instead, breakfast was served thanks to the Black Panther Party. At the time, the militant Black Nationalist Party was vilified in the news media and feared by those intimidated by its message of Black power and its commitment to ending police brutality and the subjugation of Black Americans. But for students eating breakfast, the Black Panthers' politics were less interesting than the meals they were providing. The children, many of whom had never eaten breakfast before the Panthers started their program, the Sun reporter wrote, think the Panthers are groovy and very nice for doing this for them.
Groovy.
Stokely Carmichael. The content will resume in 14 seconds. Learn more. 016 slash 0.
I thought it would whatchamacallit. What did this?
The
There we go.
program may have been groovy, but its purpose was to fuel revolution by encouraging Black people's survival. From 1969 through the early 1970s, the Black Panthers' free breakfast for school children program fed tens of thousands of hungry kids. It was just one facet of a wealth of social programs created by the party, and it helped contribute to the existence of federal free breakfast programs today. When Black Panther Party founders Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale founded the party in 1966, their goal was to end police brutality in Oakland. But a faction of the civil rights movement led by SNCC member Stokely Carmichael began calling for the uplift and self-determination of African Americans, and soon Black Power was part of their platform.
This is important too. I hate the fact that they're saying Stokely Carmichael. That's Kwame Ture. We're going to be saying Kwame Ture from here on out. Um, but Kwame Ture, prominent socialist, vice president of Ghana, um, uh, was calling for the self determination of Black people. Uh, you can say he's one of the fathers of Black nationalism. We love him. The whole point here is that I was going to say his name. I was going to say his old name, his dead name. Kwame um, was a big influence on Huey and on Bobby, because when Huey and Bobby started it, they just wanted to unionize Black people. They wanted like a community union to keep police from killing Black people. And they formed this group in order to kind of police, like kind of go around and watch the police and make sure the police didn't do anything crazy to Black people, especially in Black neighborhoods. Um, but then they started listening to Kwame Ture talk, and they started listening to what socialism would do and all of these other things. And some of the Black Panthers were were in college, and Kwame would go around to colleges giving lectures and talks about things that were going on in the world, especially within socialist movements. And that's where this socialist influence and the looking into the self-determination of Black people, and then obviously looking at what Mao had said in 1963 about the race and class question, and talking about how Black people and especially Asian people need to come together in order to fight imperial forces that have been waging white supremacist wars and creating class conflicts in these two continents. Um, and it is especially important because Kwame being later on being the vice president of Ghana, it was 100% all for African people. He was saying African people. He was telling us, like, there was a big discussion in the 1960s about whether or not we would be called African American, whether we would just embrace the word African. Oh, excuse me, whether we would just embrace the word African, whether we would just be called Black. And for a long time, Kwame was just talking about being Black, Black power, this whole thing, and was actually one of the arbiters and coined the term Black power. Um, but later on, he started saying, instead of it being Black, he started saying African. And he created the All African People's Party, where it was kind of a political party. And that's when he started going around to schools. This might have been around the time that he influenced Huey and Bobby when during the All African People's Party. But he was talking about Black nationalism and all of this other stuff about the movement of Black people. And that's super important because had it not been for Kwame, Huey may have never heard of Mao. Bobby may have never heard of Mao. And so it obviously took Black people to help out Black people. And moving into what Mao had said, and the influence of Mao for Huey was then shaping the Panthers' ideology.
Platform. At first, the Black Panther Party primarily organized neighborhood police patrols that took advantage of open carry laws, but over time its mandate expanded to include social programs. 2. Brad Jones, member of the Philadelphia Black Panthers organization, helping serve breakfast to youngsters. Credit: Bill Ingram/AP Photo. Free breakfast for school children was one of the most effective. It began in January 1969 at an Episcopal church in Oakland, and within weeks it went from feeding a handful of kids to hundreds. The program was simple. Party members and volunteers went to local grocery stores to solicit donations, consulted with nutritionists on healthful breakfast options for children, and prepared and served the food free of charge. School officials
So that's like super duper easy. Like the strategy here, we'll go over some strategies later on, more so in the Discord and whatever else. But you don't have to go out, and you don't have to be rich in order to like fund these revolutionary actions. You can just ask for donations. You just ask for whatever. I used to go to Panera every night when they closed and get all of the bread that they weren't going to sell that day because Panera sells fresh bread. If they don't sell it, they throw it away, and they give it away at the end of the night. And I would go and I would leave with like so much bread, so much, and it's like sourdough too. It's like good bread, it's like really good bread. And we would go out and we would hand it out to unhoused people. Sometimes we'd portion it and we'd wrap it in like saran wrap or whatever else, and we'd hand it to unhoused people, along with like a couple drinks or whatever that we get for like, I don't know, $1 at the dollar store or whatever. You can get water. You can get like a case of water at the dollar store for like $4. Whereas like if you go to, I don't know, fucking Lowe's or Walmart or whatever, it'll be like $8 for a case of water. But you can get it at the dollar store for like $4. Um, and we would hand that shit out. So like getting donations or whatever. But anyway, we're talking about the Panthers. We're talking about the Panthers.
Immediately reported results in kids who had free breakfast before school. The school principal came down and told us how different the children were. Ruth Beckford, a parishioner who helped with the program, said later. They weren't falling asleep in class. They weren't crying with stomach cramps. Soon, the program had been embraced by party outposts nationwide. At its peak, the Black Panther Party fed thousands of children per day in at least 45 programs. Food wasn't the only part of the BPP's social programs. They expanded to cover everything from free medical clinics to community ambulance services and legal clinics. For the party, it was an opportunity to counter its increasingly negative image in the public consciousness, an image of intimidating Afroed black men holding guns.
So this is obviously this here is talking about the implementation of the programs and what it did for the children. And that's an effect of what we'll talk about in a little bit called dual power, a big strategy of the Black Panther Party. And I think maybe a form of conceptualization of Maoism. I'm not 100% sure, but the whole point of dual power is that like dual meaning two power, it's the power of both. So you're teaching people and you're giving people what they need in order to understand the teachings. So like if you're telling people to go out and if you're going out and telling people you need to read theory, you need to understand dialectical analysis or whatever other Marxist terms we want to talk about, but they're hungry, they're not listening to you because they're worried about them being hungry. So you feed them. And then while they're eating and while they're full and while they're happy, you can teach them things because you've given them something. One, and two, they no longer need like something that won't that has been distracting them. They no longer need the food because you fed them. Like this is a whole thing about dual power. You go out, you teach about socialism, and you give people things that they need in order uh to be able to listen to your teachings. If someone is unhoused, they're not going to listen to you about, like, if someone is unhoused and it's raining, they're not going to listen to you about overthrowing the government because they're worried about dying of exposure. They're worried about freezing to death, right? Like that's just true. So you need to do things to help them out in order for them to be able to listen to you. That's the part of dual power. Um the power of both.
Guns, while addressing a critical community need. I mean, nobody can argue with free grits, said filmmaker Roger Guenver Smith in a Huey P. Newton story, a 2001 film in which he portrays Newton. Bill Whitfield, member of the Black Panther chapter in Kansas City, serving free breakfast to children before they go to school. Credit: William P. Streeter/AP photo. Free food seemed relatively innocuous, but not to FBI head J. Edgar Hoover, who loathed the Black Panther Party and declared war against them in 1969. He called the program potentially the greatest threat to efforts by authorities to neutralize the BPP and destroy what it stands for, and gave carte blanche to law enforcement to
Carte
destroy it.
blanche. So basically, the reason why this has happened is because J. Edgar Hoover, at the time, who was the head of the FBI, as it said, was against the Black Panther Party for various reasons, and mostly because of their what he called insurrectionary action in policing the police, and because the Black Panthers were going out, they were holding police accountable, they were pulling out firearms, and they were stopping the police from being able to continuously harm black people the way that they were abusing black people. And J. Edgar Hoover, who sent spies into communities and was being reported to by police in order to get certain crime reports and whatever, as the head of the FBI, saw this as an issue, obviously, because he wanted the police to be able, excuse me, to harm black people. um Hierarchy of needs is for real. Once those basic needs are met, you can conquer the world. No, that part, literally that part. That's literally the point. Like, once your basic needs are met, you can go out and overthrow like the government who's not providing it. And that's important when it comes to Maoism as well. This goes into uh that's why I said it might be dual power, might be a conceptualization of Maoism as well. I'm not 100% sure. Where is it? Here it is. Uh but where is it? The Maoists also use propaganda and disinformation against the state, institutions as other components of their insurgency doctrine. Um there's also a doctrine of capture state power through combination of armed insurgency, mass mobilization, and strategic alliances. There was one where it was about education. Let me see, real quick. Bearing arms is non-negotiable as per the insurgency document. Malice ideology glorifies violence. Cadres over purported inadequacies of the existing system. Right. Wait, hold on. That's a military instance. Where is... I swear I had a thing here. Okay, I thought I had a thing here. I want to show it to you. I'll put it in the Discord a little bit later. But it was about the education of the people being a part of the Maoist doctrine as well. And that being like extremely important. Uh hmm. I don't know. But either way, the whole point here is that J. Edgar Hoover was against the Black Panther Party. We're going to go back into this. J. Edgar Hoover was against the Black Panther Party because he saw them as trying to essentially set black people free. And he saw that as an issue because he wanted police to be able to abuse black people. So he called them insurrectionists. He said that they were a danger, like a danger to society, all of these other things. And the free breakfast program hurt his rhetoric. It like killed his rhetoric because a bunch of people would say, like, a bunch of the people he would send as spies to the Black Panther Party would be like, these niggas is feeding kids. Like, these niggas ain't going out here killing cops. They're feeding kids. Like, why am I here? Why am I spying on these guys? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Why did you want me to do this? And that hurt his rhetoric. The free breakfast program. And it also created revolutionaries. Like, you can see here the kids putting up the Black Power fist. Like, in the 1960s. This is what year was this taken? uh I think this was the one taken in 1969. In 1969, there's still segregation. There's still segregation. Um right here. So uh yeah, it was creating revolution. And if it created and the free breakfast program wasn't the only program, as we talked about. The survivor program included fucking groceries. So the parents were joining. They had 2,000 members at their peak. Like this was a no-brainer for J. Edgar Hoover. This was a nightmare. It was radicalizing people, especially black people, black children who would grow up obviously to be adults and understand that what was happening to them by the police was not acceptable, understand that racism was not acceptable, all of these other things. But all right, I'm gonna stop rambling.
It.
I'm playing.
The results were swift and devastating. FBI agents went door to door in cities like Richmond, Virginia, telling parents that BPP members would teach their children racism. In San Francisco, writes historian Francisca Meister, parents
What does
were
that
told the
sound like?
food was
What does
infected.
that wait, real quick? What does that sound like? So as I said before, Maoists talk about the disinformation of the state and turn it into something else. And who is the main people right now talking about racism and teaching your children racism? It's the racists, the fascists, the Republican Party. It's white people in particular, but it's absolutely the Republican Party, who are also backed by the Democrats, going into places and areas talking about critical race theory will teach your kids racism and teach black kids how to be racist towards white kids. Seriously, that's what's happening. Um it's so crazy how basic moral task of generosity or just assistance in general is vehemently regarded as treason. That part, literally that part. um and it's because of who, number one, it is because of who's doing it, and number two, it is, excuse me, it is because obviously who's doing it being black people, and two, because it is teaching other people to sympathize with a black movement and black causes. So when black people do something that teach people like, hey, we're not monsters, that is an issue. That is a huge issue. um Especially when people start to believe it, because, or when they start to not believe it, but like, it's true, so people, I guess, believe it is the right term. I don't know, I can't think of the right word. But the whole point here for J. Edgar Hoover, what I'm talking about here, is that J. Edgar Hoover, this is an old strategy. FBI members went door to door in cities like Richmond, Virginia, telling parents that the Black Panther Party would teach their children racism. Like, teaching, they're saying that going against racism is a white supremacist tactic. That's not anything new that is happening today. This is why when black revolutionaries like myself, or Super Solid, and we talk about like these tactics are so old, they're so like ingrained into our society, they're almost default. Saying the things that white people say about things like critical race theory or DEI, because they're talking about, oh, DEI is racist. It's the same fucking strategy. It's the same thing. Like, there is no difference in someone telling you that DEI is racist or critical race theory is going to teach your kids how to be racist towards white kids, than it is for FBI members to say that the Black Panther Party was teaching their kids racism. The only difference is that we don't have any major organizations today dedicated to fighting racism as revolutionaries. We need them, though. We need them.
Infected with venereal disease, sites in Oakland and Baltimore were raided by officers who harassed BPP members in front of terrified children, and participating children were photographed by Chicago police. The night before, the first breakfast program in Chicago was supposed to open. A female Panther told historian Nick Haynan the Chicago police broke into the church and mashed up all the food and urinated on it. Ultimately, these and other efforts to destroy the Black Panthers broke up the program. In the end, though, the public visibility of the Panthers' breakfast programs put pressure on political leaders to feed children before school.
And this is the whole thing. Like, in order to get rid of in order to continue to put the Black Panthers in a bad light, the state had to pick up the program and continue to do what the Black Panthers were doing so that the Black Panthers couldn't do it anymore. But like, just think of it like food that is feeding children, food that is feeding children. People break in, the police in particular, break into a church and start peeing on food that is meant to feed children. This is what they do. This is what they've been doing. This has been a thing the entire fucking time. Like, when we say this white supremacy shit ain't nothing new, it ain't nothing new. It ain't nothing new. It's nothing. People will justify this. People will see this and justify this and say the Chicago police breaking into a church, urinating and stomping on food that is meant to feed children who are starving was a good thing. And then in the same breath tell you that Mao, who inspired programs like this by the Black Panthers, by the way, Mao starved his people. They will tell you that. They will say that out loud. Like, think about that. Seriously, think about that. It's insane. I don't mean it in a joking. Urinating is absolutely diabolical, and I don't mean it in a joking way either. It's actually deplorable. No, literally, we know what you mean. Anytime I hear venereal disease, I get Lil Wayne stuck in my head. That's funny. And children, literally, this. It is food. Listen, the Chicago police broke into a church and mashed up all the food and urinated on it. That's insane. That is insane. They're just trying to feed kids. They're trying to feed kids. And the big problem is that these kids are Black. Like, these kids and these people who are trying to feed these kids are Black. That is the big issue. That is the reason why this food deserved, quote unquote, deserved to be urinated on.
School. The result of thousands of American children becoming accustomed to free breakfast, former party member Norma Amor Mtoum told Eater, was the government expanded its own school food programs. Though the USDA had piloted free breakfast efforts since the mid-1960s, the program only took off in the early 1970s, right around the time the Black Panthers programs were dismantled. In 1975, the school breakfast program was permanently authorized. Today, it helps feed over 14.57 million children before school, and without the radical actions of the Black Panthers, it may never have happened.
That's important to talk about too, because people will justify this and say, no, 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 it wasn't the Panthers that did it. White people, especially, and Black people who hate themselves. There's anyone who hates Black people will say, no, 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 the Panthers didn't do that. The government already had programs since the mid 1960s. Why weren't they in action then? Why didn't they have funding for it then? Why is it that when the Panthers did it, they destroyed the food then? Answer those questions. Those are not rhetorical questions. If anyone ever says that, ask them those questions. These are not rhetorical questions. Why is it that the program wasn't there yet? Why didn't they have funding for the program? Why is it that when someone else took efforts to make the program happen, the food was destroyed by those people who were supposed to be protecting and serving, right? We're gonna move on here to Fred Hampton. 50 years of Fred Hampton's Rainbow Coalition. The Rainbow Coalition was created by Fred Hampton, but it was heavily influenced by, I really believe it's heavily influenced by Mao, because this goes into racial questions, class question, and the racial struggle being amplified by the class struggle being racial struggle being amplified by the class struggle. Yes. Yes. That's the way to say it. That's the way to say it. The racial struggle being amplified by the class struggle. I'm sorry, because I was gonna say the class struggle being amplified by the racial struggle. And I was like, is it the class struggle being amplified? It's the racial struggle being amplified because the first capital was black people. So it's a racial structure utilized by class issues. But this is 50 years. This one is the just Southside Weekly. This is a paper here. Like I said, I'm trying to be like newsy. I'm trying to do news shit. I hope I'm doing all right. I appreciate you all for being here. But we're gonna do this Chicago style coalition building helped to produce the first black mayor of Chicago and put its first Latinx representative in office. Some even believe its legacy led to the election of the city's first black woman mayor. Excuse me, but but unbeknownst to many, this form of organizing started in the street 50 years ago with what was called the Rainbow Coalition, a progressively fundamentally socialist movement that set the foundation for radical ideas and civil disobedience in Chicago. Um, this is just talking about stuff that has been happening. Hold on, let's see. I'm probably let it do its own thing.
On a February afternoon in 1969, Chairman Fred Hampton and his contingent of Illinois Black Panthers went looking for a Puerto Rican kid by the name of Cha-Cha in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood. Hampton had just read in the paper that the Young Lords Street Organization had
This is actually important because I think it was Cha Cha that was himself abused by police. Um, it was either Cha Cha or someone Cha Cha knew that was abused by police, and there was a big movement in Chicago to stop police brutality on Latinx residents of Chicago. And this is something that led to Fred Hampton wanting to create a rainbow coalition. And he ended up finding people with the same plights as black people to create like rainbow coalitions where he was in Chicago.
had shut themselves in the 18th District Police Station, along with the police commander and the media, to protest the ongoing police harassment of Lading's residents. The
Latinx.
Illinois chapter of the Black Panthers established themselves on the west side of Chicago in 1968 and functioned under a 10-point program of self-empowerment and service. Their Oakland, California founding members were already involved in multiracial movement building through the left-wing and anti-war peace and freedom party.
So Rainbow Coalition started in Chicago, and on the West Coast, it was the Anti-War Peace and Freedom Party, which essentially was the same as the Rainbow Coalition. The only difference is that like it had different organizations that would work together rather than it being just simply different. Fred Hampton kind of focused on the race issue of like different races coming together in order to wage class struggle, whereas the Anti-War and Peace Freedom Party focused on different organizations. So different black organizations that would march with the Panthers, and as well as just like student organizations that were diverse, whether work coalitions, workers unions that would like march with them. So it was more of a diverse thing in California, where they were just kind of looking at different organizations, whereas Fred Hampton was focused on uh like race. He was focused on getting Asian people to march with black people, focused on Latinx people, like brown people, to march with black people, et cetera, et cetera.
Party.
The Young Lords formed on the streets of Chicago in 1960 as a gang, but in 1968, they declared themselves a civil rights organization. In trips to the West Coast, they were exposed to the Black Panthers, the Brown Berets, and the American Indian movement, who were mobilizing together for racial justice there. Shortly after meeting, the two youths would found the original Rainbow Coalition, a poor people's army, as Jose Chacha Jimenez refers to it, that joined forces with working-class whites from the city's north side. As men were landing on the moon for the first time in a global display of American exceptionalism, the Rainbow Coalition was drawing citywide and nationwide attention to police brutality, premeditated gentrification, and institutional racism in Chicago.
Um, yeah, I mean, there's really nothing else to say here. It's just they got together. They were pointing out racial inequality, especially in police brutality amongst Black and Latinx members of both this organization and just the community. Um, And wow, I love that they said that while America was landing on a moon in a spectacular display of American exceptionalism, or sorry, a global display of American exceptionalism, that American exceptionalism is fucking. If you don't know what American exceptionalism is, it is when like American exceptionalism is like it doesn't happen to Americans, or in America things are different, where Americans, especially American citizens, consider themselves to be like this kind of untouchable, kind of don't need to come to terms with their racism society, where in America, like American exceptionalism exists on all spectrums, to be honest. Because like if for leftists, what'll happen is leftists will say, certain leftists in the United States will say like, oh, well, that doesn't apply to me because that won't happen here in America. Like there's no way a revolution like that can happen like here in America. So I don't need to focus on getting food, or I don't need to focus on building community or whatever. We could just do it through X, Y, and Z. And that's American exceptionalism, because things are good relatively to a bunch of different places. Things are good here. Like, I mean, most people can't afford to really live here, even though we do. But things are relatively good here. Like I got this set up, I got this computer and whatever, and there are parts of the world where they don't have this. And American exceptionalism it tends to let like even American leftists believe like while the revolution is going on, I'll be able to live stream it from my Twitch account. Like it's just insanity. In this particular instance, American exceptionalism, excuse me, is talking about how, because getting to the moon was a feat, was a big economic feat for the United States, especially to race Russia to the moon, and to be the number one superpower, the number one global superpower. The space race and America going to the moon was this display of America saying like, we're this great country, we do all of these great things, whilst they were segregating Black people, whilst they were brutalizing Latinx and Black people all throughout the United States, right? Like whilst they were doing medical racism, whilst they were doing all of these things that were shitty, and they didn't want anyone to know that they were doing all of these shitty things. Which is why whenever it comes to light with you giving children food, they do things like dismantle those programs and urinate on the food. Because if it gets out that they're not giving their people food, they look bad around the world. But when they're landing on the moon, it's a worldwide display of this American greatness and how great it is to be in the United States. And that is American exceptionalism, like hands down. So I love that they use that.
Fred took the young lords under his wing. He gave us the skills that we needed to come right out of the gang and start organizing the community, said Cha-Cha, now 71, leader of the gang-turned-political organization, in an interview. We were already fighting for our rights in our neighborhoods, and we needed to form a united front. Our mission was self-determination for our barrios and all oppressed nations. In Chicago, the Black and Latinx activists became natural
Latinx.
allies. Both communities had been battling Italian, German, Irish, and other white street gangs that were enforcing redlining at the street level. Black and leading Chicagoans lived together in the Cabrini Green projects, attended overcrowded schools, and were denied entrance to certain beaches, restaurants, and public spaces. Their parents had practically no access to city jobs or home ownership. The youth, who rocked black and purple berets as their respective colors, began to identify the pigs at the Chicago Police Department and Mayor Richard J. Daley as their common adversaries. At the time, Chicago was a deeply segregated city, recovering from the violence of the 1968 Democratic National Convention and the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who, years earlier, led the Chicago Freedom Movement, a campaign.
We're gonna skip ahead here. Um, well, Martin Luther King Jr. So happy Martin Luther King Day. But we're gonna skip down here. So we can talk about the strategy, right, and the influence of the Maoists
Those
within
who
the
remember
strategy.
Hampton say he had the leadership skills to arrange gang truces and bring together unlikely groups. Billy Che Brooks, Deputy Minister of Education for the Illinois Black Panther Party, credits him with reaching out to William Preacher Man Fesperman and the Young Patriots, a street organization of white youths whose parents and grandparents had migrated from Appalachia seeking jobs, but now resided in slum-like conditions in and around the Uptown neighborhood. The newly formed Rainbow Coalition embraced the historic momentum of 1969 to organize an unprecedented partnership between blue-collar workers from the countryside and a variety of poor urban dwellers. Hampton understood that creating these alliances was necessary to engage in a protracted class struggle, according to Che, who today mentors.
What does that sound like? What does that sound like? A protracted class struggle? What does that sound like? What does that sound like? Hmm? What does that sound like? Does it sound like the protracted People's War? This is what I mean. Like a lot of these things, like most people don't know a whole lot about the Black Panthers. Most people don't know a lot about the Black Panthers, but especially when it comes to the influence of other revolutions on revolutionary action by prominent groups in an area. Like it just protracted people's war. Like literally this. Mal called this process the protracted people's war. Um it just when we're talking about revolutionary action, like I know it sounds corny to say no, there's nothing new under the sun, but there isn't. There really isn't. Um, but we'll start back right here because I fucking love that. I didn't even know that was in there. I didn't even know that that was in there.
From the countryside and a variety of poor urban dwellers. Hampton understood that creating these alliances was necessary to engage in a protracted class struggle, according to Che,
Protracted class
who today
struggle.
mentors youth at Chicago public libraries. Our thing was that Black people organize in the Black community, Puerto Ricans organize in the Puerto Rican community, Mexicanos organize in the Mexican community, and poor white people organize in their community. And then they come together, he explained in an interview. Today, we call it coalition politics, Che said.
It's so like people don't understand the influence. Protracted class struggle, coming together, organizing in your own community to converge in on the state. That is 100% a Maoist strategy. And again, I myself am not a Maoist. I'm just talking about the conceptualization of Maoism and how it was utilized in especially American. Well, we're talking about Black Panther in particular, Black struggles. Um, well, into Fred Hampton a little bit because we've been mentioning Fred Hampton a lot. That's a picture of Fred right there. Um,
Frederick Allen Hampton was a powerful 21-year-old Black Panther Party, BPP, activist and self-described revolutionary socialist. He was the prominent leader and chairman of the Chicago, Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. Their power to the people philosophy led Fred to founding the Rainbow Coalition, a multicultural alliance among major street gangs to help put an end to infighting and work for social change. Fred was a gifted student and athlete dedicated to empowering and uplifting the Black community. He enrolled at Triton Junior College, where he majored in pre-law in hopes of using his knowledge of the legal system to stop police brutality. Active in the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. At a young age, Fred assumed leadership of its West Suburban Branch's Youth Council. He demonstrated his leadership capacity by building a youth group of 500 members. He also worked to establish better neighborhood recreational facilities and improve educational resources for impoverished Black communities.
We're gonna pause that right there because this just shows where he gets like his leadership abilities in order to implement um, the free breakfast program, the grocery program, and all of these other things. We're gonna skip to here.
As Fred's influence grew, he, along with other Panthers, were identified as a radical threat by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, in 1967. The FBI began disseminating disinformation about the groups Fred belonged to and placed a counterintelligence operative, COINTELPRO, in the local Panthers. A hearing on FBI misconduct uncovered documents containing directives to destroy the Panthers' Breakfast for Children program and to disrupt the distribution of the BPP newspaper. Fred survived the COINTELPRO and governmental smear campaign, but not the assassin's bullets. On December 4, 1969, Fred was shot and killed in his bed during a pre-dawn raid at his Chicago apartment.
He was murdered. He was murdered. He was murdered in his apartment in front of his wife and kid. And at 21, no less, absolutely amazing. He did all of this at 21. He did all of this at 21, creating programs, parts of the survival program for the Black Panther Party. He was the chairman of the Black Panther Party. Before that, he was part of NAACP. He gathered 500 people to join, to create a coalition with them. Absolutely amazing. And employed all of these strategies and created like there we go, and created big rainbow coalition, a big revolutionary action that we still use today. This is about right here. We're going into Yellow Peril supports Black Power. Yellow Peril is like the Asian faction of the Black Panther Party. It's been Yellow Peril has been something in use forever, but this was written about 2020, especially with the resurgence of Yellow Peril supporting Black Power, because it was about Asian people who supported Black Lives Matter.
The slogan, Yellow Peril supports Black Power, has played an important part in our nation's history. In 2020, Asian Americans adopted this phrase to express unity and support for the Black Lives Matter movement. This has brought activists to recently criticize its usage by arguing that the slogan diminishes the significance of the movement by conflating the struggles of Asian Americans with those of the Black community. The term Yellow Peril first originated in the 1800s. During this time in U.S. history, Chinese laborers were being brought to America to replace recently emancipated Black people as a cheap source of labor.
Remember this. Japan, America frees its slaves in 1865. 1870 is the latest. Well, really 1960s, like 1964. But we'll go over that in a slavery life. But either way, the remember in 1865, America frees its slaves. In 1895, China is invaded by Japan. In 1894, China is invaded by Japan, and the war goes into 1895. In between 1865 in 1895, the United States lands in Japan and says, you're going to trade with us and do a bunch of unequal treaties. Remember, we talked about that? And we talked about that earlier in the stream, and we implemented a bunch of unequal treaties. So the United States is now a big enforcer in Japanese imperialism. So when Japan goes into China and takes over and annexes Korea and takes Korean people and takes Chinese people, who do you think also gets Korean and Chinese people? The imperial forces that enforce them. And so when Japan gets kicked out of China and says, no, you can't invade the rest of China, and the spheres of influence come, and it's France, Germany, and Russia, at the time, Russia being a feudalist country, not the USSR, they kick Japan out. But then when Japan goes back and invades China again and takes over China during the Russo Japanese War, and kicks Russia out of China and takes control of China, the fucking but the fucking United States gets a lot of that stuff, gets a lot of their what they're imperializing, gets their people, gets all of these things. Didn't I hush you up? Did I hush you up? Do you want to be hushed again? Here, let's do this. Let's do this. There you go. Literally this. He's so obsessed for no reason. Like insane. Like who's gonna tell them that I don't give a shit about Tariq Nasheed's dumbass? But anyway, moving forward, remember China being imperialized by Japan, who is forced to trade with the United States and Britain, is now in control of China in the late 1800s. And what it says, the term yellow peril first originated in the 1800s. During this time in the U.S. history, Chinese laborers were being brought to America to replace recently emancipated black people as a cheap source of labor. They were building the railroads. China was building the railroads. Yeah, Siobhan, just block them or mute them or whatever. I muted him. But either way, but China was building the railroads in the United States, getting them from Japan. This is why we talked about this earlier. The unequal treaties of Japan, Japan's invasion of China, the Sino-Japanese War, Japan's invasion of China, the massacre at Nanking, the Russo-Japanese War, and fighting for China and fighting for the Korean peninsula, the Korean peninsula, which was heavily influenced by China. This was the McDuckin incident in Manchuria, right before Nanking. Excuse me. And Japan taking over China, and Japan creating themselves, making themselves a big superpower in the global scale by not only trading resources that they stole from China. I guess you can say resources because people are technically a resource, but people that they take from China, give it to the US, and the US was utilizing Chinese laborers as cheap labor. I will restart right here, but that's why we talk about all this. That's why this is very important, because yellow peril supports black power goes back to the United States implementing imperial forces on China through Japan and through spheres of influence, even within Germany and France.
The term yellow peril first originated in the 1800s. During this time in U.S. history, Chinese laborers were being brought to America to replace recently emancipated Black people as a cheap source of labor. It became evident that Chinese laborers were making less than their white counterparts and soon became one of the first victims of racist backlash from white workers who saw them as a threat to their livelihood. In 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act was
Remember this. So white workers see Chinese workers as a threat to their livelihood. They're taking our jobs. They're taking our jobs. In 1882, they were saying they're taking our jobs. That was the rhetoric. It's not new. This white supremacy is not new.
passed and became the first law to restrict immigration based on race. Then, in the 1960s, the phrase "yellow peril supports Black power" started being used by students at San Francisco State University, SFSU, and University of California, Berkeley, when they formed a Third World Liberation Front to fight injustices in campus life, admissions, and the lives of students of color. The group was composed of SFSU's Black Student Union, the Mexican American Student Confederation, the Asian American Political Alliance, and the Native American Student Alliance.
Sounds
Through
about
this
white.
coalition, students banded together to form and establish better academic studies and reclaimed the term yellow peril to use for empowerment. Richard Aoki became the only Asian American to hold leadership in the Black Panther organization. This organization was founded in 1966 in Oakland, California, and was very influential in the civil rights movement. The members challenged politicians, police, and protected Black citizens from brutality.
We're gonna stop it there. I'll post all these sources in there. This is Andrews University, andrews.edu, talking about yellow peril supports Black power. Just an article. Hear about that, but that's mad important. That is mad important because yellow peril supports Black power is talking about exactly what Mao had talked about before. Oop, wrong thing. What Mao had talked about before. Racial question is a class question. Like, think about that. Yellow peril started in the 1800s after emancipated Black people were being replaced by Chinese people to build railroads. Chinese people were then subject to racial bias by white people who said these Chinese immigrants who were forced here, who were forced to come to the United States, are taking our jobs. So they created coalitions called Yellow Peril. The entire point of Yellow Peril is reclaimed word by Asian people, especially Chinese, by Chinese people, because the Yellow Peril was them coming to take white people's jobs. They called it, because peril is a fear, the yellow fear, the fear of the yellow. Yellow is a racial way, a racially discriminatory way to refer to Asian people, especially Chinese people. And that's where the term for Chinese people became yellow. Like it was said, yeah, yellow this, yellow that, whatever. And these were the slurs. These were the slurs that they used. Yellow peril. These yellow people are taking our jobs. Yada yada yada. Blah blah blah. That's the white supremacy. So they said these Chinese immigrants who are forced to be here are taking all of our jobs. And just like Satanic Panic, it has its own word, yellow peril. And so yellow peril, when formed groups, was reclaimed by those Chinese laborers who formed unions, and later on in the 1960s formed a group to fight alongside the Black Panther Party. And when Huey was arrested, obviously they stood out and they had Free Huey signs and Yellow Peril supports Black Power signs. This is just like the connector right there, like a direct connector. But this is why we talk about all of these things. This is why we talk about the invasion of China by Japan and the war between Japan and Russia in order to take over influence of China and to imperialize China, because Japan was taking over China so that they can send Chinese people to the United States so that Chinese people can build railroads and take over like the jobs that African slaves were doing, right here in this one. Um because black people had just been freed, and this is all important to know. This is all incredibly important to know, because you can see the tactics of the United States government here, saying these immigrants are coming to take our jobs, being utilized today, being utilized. White supremacy is nothing new. um we're going to this is all it was only like two more paragraphs. This is a long paragraph, but there was only about two more paragraphs of this. We're going to move on from this about Yellow Peril. This kind of just wraps up the whole thing of everything that we've talked about. But the final thing I'm gonna leave it on here is Huey Newton talking about education and the importance of education, especially in building programs when it comes to building really anything, but especially for dual power, right? It is mad important that you educate people, and he'll tell you why in a second. Panthers and non-Panthers, another organization shows its program to Chairman Fred Hampton. That's what it says.
You basically knowing my ideology, and basically you knowing me knowing yours, you can support some of our programs. Is that what you're saying?
Why not?
And you believe in programs like the Breakfast for Children program and free health clinics? Right on, brothers?
We believe they're good things.
Uh-huh.
As a focal point to organize their mothers and fathers.
Uh-huh.
Peace.
Mm-hmm. There's no educational program here?
That's come out of the social action thing. You know, you set that up, brother. I mean, we can't put everything on.
One of the big things, I will say, I'm gonna pause it real quick. I'll rewind it a little bit. But one of the big things for Fred was education, obviously, but for the Panthers in general, the Panthers had a 16-week education program where before you can even call yourself a member of the Black Panther Party, you had to pass a 16-week political education program. And the reason for this, well, he'll get into the reason for this, but it's just it's important to know. So I'll rewind it a little bit.
Peace.
Mm-hmm. There's no educational program here?
That's come out of the social action thing. You know, you set that up, brother. I mean, we can't put everything on one piece of paper.
What about this bank?
Credit union?
Mm-hmm.
Credit union. Credit union, my brother.
Is a
if
bank.
you're hip, are you hip to credit unions? It is a bank.
Yeah, you go and borrow money?
Yeah, it's a bank. It's a bank. Owned by the people, run for the people, and by the people.
What will money be given out to people for?
Well, the people would decide that. You want to buy, you know, whatever, you know, the people in the community decide. You need some living room furniture, maybe? You need a car, maybe?
See, the thing is with me, you dig, I need to know some more about it. I wish you had some more literature about the educational thing here. Because, you dig, as far as we're concerned in the struggle, the way we look at struggle is that this depends on the educational thing, you dig. Because
this depends on the education. Well, the whole thing.
No, but in the end, this does. You can form this with no education. You can form this.
No, not the way we're talking about forming it. You know, right.
He's going to get into why education is so important in just a few minutes. But yeah, I'll just let it play.
Right. We're talking about forming it right. You know, it's not on the paper. We didn't write it on the paper.
Form it right with no education.
No.
Let me give you an example. Jomo Kenyatta formed the excellent revolution with no education. And on the day of the end thing, Jomo told the motherfucker, said, well, you know, you've been educated to hate the enemy, but I'm your brother. I help you lead the revolution. Now I'm going to oppress you. Another example, Papa Doc in Haiti. Papa Doc in Haiti hated everything white. Man, you couldn't put this white paper in front of Papa Doc's face. But he moved all the white people out and he took over and be the president. He did, causing no education. And the people that had been educated, they just said that we don't hate the motherfucker white people, we hate the oppressor, whether he be white, black, brown, or yellow. So we got to know the educational program to find out what is going to be in the finale. A lot of people, Jomo Kenyatta is called not a never a revolutionary, but an ex-revolutionary. So is Papa Doc. They brought on a successful revolution. That thing in the Mau Mau's was a bitch. Bantu freedom fighters, all that kind of action. But what we're saying is that it's the end. That you don't judge Castro now. You can't do it. Nobody in this room could judge whether Castro's going to be a revolutionary or not. You know what I mean? We're talking about things, you know what I mean, with China, the People's Republic, and even at the stage they're in now, talking about even going on further into a communistic state. That's what we're talking about. Those are revolutionary. So we got to understand here the educational program that you have to be able to figure out whether it will go on the right lines where the people will end up in a situation where they can be able to really control themselves. You understand what I'm saying? With no education, the people take this local foundation and start stealing money because they won't be really educated to why it's the people's thing anyway. You understand what I'm saying? With no education, you have neo-colonialism instead of colonialism, like you got in Africa now, like you got in Haiti. So what we're talking about is there has to be an educational program. That's very important. As a matter of fact, it's so important for us that a person has to go through 6 weeks of our political education before he can consider himself a member of the party,
16,
able to even run down ideology for the party. Why? Because if they don't have an education, then they're nowhere. You dig what I'm saying? They're nowhere because they don't even know why they're doing what they're doing. You might get people caught up in the emotionalist movement. You understand me? You might get them caught up in because they're poor and they want something. And then if they're not educated, they want more. And before you know it, they'll be capitalists. And before you know it, we have Negro imperialists.
And that's mad important right there because that's exactly these thought processes are influenced by Mao. The reason why we went over earlier today all of the neo-imperialism that happened in China that led to the revolution, the socialist revolution. There were multiple revolutions in China, but the socialist revolution was the most successful one. Seeing as how it's still there today. But yeah, like the neo-imperialism and neo-colonialism that happened in China was based upon one, Japanese people funding warlords in China to split up different regions, as well as France, Russia, and Germany funding warlords to split up different regions and send people, resources, whatever it may be, that they were imperializing. To those countries that were in control of them, wars that were fought over a country where the people in the country had no say over who their leadership would be or what they would do when they got leadership. And that's why we went over the importance of like Japan, especially in their influence in China, and I would say influence, but their colonialism in China. But this is where we wrap it up. This is where we wrap it up because Fred Hampton talking about the importance of education is just I think it does a really good job at summing everything together, especially when he talks about neo-colonialism and Negro imperialism, because he's talking about black people. But in particular, it was said before by people like Mao that China was split up and it was Chinese imperialism, Chinese neo-imperialism, or Sino neo-imperialism. And so understanding the education, the dual power, and all of these things is mad important for our revolution today. And that's it. That's this episode on China. In the chat, you said you never knew about Yellow Peril, but their relationship with the Black Panther Party is so contingent on imperial powers taking advantage of POCs. 100%. And this is what was being talked about before. This is why the racial question is a class question. And you also asked, were the Asians in Yellow Peril primarily Chinese? They were. They absolutely were. They were primarily Chinese because the Koreans who were taken away from Korea were put into Japan. Whereas the Chinese people who were taken out of Korea and China were usually sent to the United States. I mean, sometimes there were Korean people who were sent to the United States. Sometimes Japanese people went to the United States as well, but it was primarily Chinese people who were being taken and sent to the United States. So yeah, people during the Yellow Peril, during the Yellow Scare, today we call it the Red Scare, but during the Yellow Scare of Asian people taking white people's jobs, and taking white people's livelihood, it was absolutely mostly Chinese people. Um, but yeah, that's it. I appreciate y'all being here. Thank you so much. I'm gonna do a stream later on Twitch. But right now I gotta get some food in me. I appreciate y'all being here. Thank you so much. I've rambled on for just about 3 hours. Oh my gosh. You guys are awesome for being here. Thank you so much. I'm gonna try and figure out a way to talk about the Discord more, for people who want to debate. If people want to come in and debate, like that person who was in here a little bit earlier, and the link it's in the down there. Would Ian Danskin would say, Innuendo Studios would say, link in the down there part. If you are 2 streams in one day, yeah, 2 streams in one day. But yeah, the link is down there for anyone who wants to debate, and I'll try and promote that a little bit more. But this is, I hope this was entertaining, at least, if not entertaining, at least a little educational. I'm gonna try and make it more entertaining. I'm sorry if it was boring. I was trying to go through a bunch of different things that I found. I cut off like all of these slides here. All of these, I don't know if you can see them up top, up here. All of these tabs, it was twice as many. Last night at like 11 o'clock when I got off stream, I cut off half of these because I was like, this is too much. It's too much information to take in. I got to just go through like the essential things, and these are all the things that I found to be essential. And I was like, that's good. That's good. It's still going to be like 3 hours worth of content or something, but I think that'll be fine. I think that'll absolutely be fine. And it's been just about 3 hours. Like it's just under 3 hours. So thank y'all for being here. I really appreciate it. You're awesome. You guys are amazing. W to everyone who's here. We'll figure this YouTube thing out as we go along, especially that modding thing. We'll figure that out more and more as we go along. But W to my mods anyway. I appreciate you. All right, y'all. Thank you. I'm gonna get some food in me, and I will see you next time. You guys are awesome. Bye.